Well, we have 7 community boards present, so I guess we can get started, or should we give it another couple of minutes?
Rosie, give me a minute so I can set up the stream, and then you can start whenever you'd like.
Okay.
And it's May, so 5 goes first this month, right?
I don't know. Maybe I'll just change it up and
No,
have
no,
you dig and have you dig for your minutes, for your notes, your report.
I worked until 1 a.m. last night. Please, no.
Yeah.
Janine Kiley's stuck over as an attendee.
I got it. I just promoted her.
Rosie, you can go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to call your community board, and if you could please state your name so it could be recorded. Community Board 1.
Good morning. This is Tammy Meltzer from Community Board 1.
Community Board 2.
Good morning. This is Janine Kiley from Community Board 2.
Community Board 3.
Good morning. This is Eric Diaz from Community Board.
Community Board 4.
Lowell Curran, Community Board 4.
Community Board 5.
Good morning, Vicky Barbero, Community Board 5.
Community Board 6.
Good morning, this is Kyle Athiad from Community Board 6.
Community Board 7. Community Board 8.
Morning, it's Russell Squire from Community Board 8.
Community Board 9. Community Board 7.
Morning, Stephen Brown, Chair for Community Board 7. Morning, Rosie.
Good morning. Community Board 10. Community Board 11.
Good morning, Xavier Santiago, Community Board 11, Vice Chairman.
Community Board 12. Great. So do I have a motion to accept the agenda for today's meeting of May 20th, 2021?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? The ayes have it. Do I have a motion or edits for the March 18th, 2021 minutes of the Borough Board?
So moved.
Thank you. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Okay, the ayes have it. April, are our presenters here already?
They are. We are joined by the Department of City Planning as well as the MTA. So if you all are ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us at this meeting. I am Chris Lee from the Zoning Division at the Department of City Planning. I'm joined by my colleagues, Angela Belicio from the Transportation Division at DCP, as well as Aska Mohudeen from our Manhattan office, and Howie Levine and Moonstone from the MTA. And today we will be presenting Zoning for Accessibility, which is a zoning text amendment that seeks to make our transit system more accessible, more quickly, and better coordinated with the streets and buildings around it. Could we get Aska to share the screen? She will be presenting. So I will first hand it off to Howie to kick off the presentation with the general background of this proposal before we get into the weeds of the zoning framework.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I'm Howie Levine from MTA Government and Community Relations. So just to give a quick high-level summary of what this is, DCP and MTA have been working together on a citywide zoning text amendment that, as Chris mentioned, is going to allow the MTA to work more efficiently and effectively with private developers to help us achieve system-wide accessibility much more quickly. And so there's two components of the proposal. The first is a system-wide transit easement requirement. And the second is an expanded transit improvement bonus in high density areas. And we'll get into both of those in more detail. Next slide. So right now, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware, our system is old. It's mostly built before 1950 without regard for vertical accessibility and overall accessibility within our stations, unfortunately. We've been making progress through our past capital plans, but there's still a long way to go. Right now, 136 out of 493 stations are currently accessible. It's about 28% of our subway and Staten Island railway system. Doing a little better on our commuter rail stations within city limits. 25 out of 39 of those stations are currently accessible. And this proposal would apply to both subway and commuter rail stations within city limits. And generally, I just want to mention up front that when we talk about accessibility and making a station accessible, that includes a whole range and suite of different things that we need to do to a station. But with this proposal, we're talking about vertical accessibility most prominently, given that's one of the most complicated things for us to add to our stations and retrofit. Next slide, please. So of course, when we think about the impacts of limited elevator access across our system, we think usually first of people with mobility disabilities, but it also impacts many other communities that need elevators, parents with young children using strollers, our growing senior population, people with temporary injuries. And for these communities of people who really need elevators to use the subway system and get around our city, a subway ride that that should take minutes can often take hours or become an errand, a visit that is just unfortunately not taken. And so these are kind of the issues that we're looking to solve for here. Next slide. And to put an even finer point on it, in Manhattan, of the 1.6 million Manhattanites, we have 100,000 residents with an ambulatory disability. We have 80,000 children under the age of 5. We have over 250,000 residents who are over the age of 65, and our senior population is only growing. From 2005 to 2015, we found the senior population growing at twice the rate of overall population growth across the city. So this is a problem that's only becoming more important for us to use, kind of whatever tools we can to get us to a system that's fully accessible. Next slide. So with that in mind, the MTA has made a historic commitment to accessibility in our most recent capital plan. We've invested over $5 billion to make 77 stations across the system accessible. The ultimate goal with this capital plan, and of course our goals are, we'll get more ambitious with each capital plan, or that have no subway rider more than 2 stations away from an accessible station. So across the entire system, you're never going to be more than 2 stations away from a station that is accessible. And that's the goal of this capital plan. And so the tools that we're going to talk about in zoning for accessibility are not instead of this capital commitment. This is not going anywhere. We're going to continue to be funding these improvements, and we'll get to more details about how that will work with this proposal. But just want to make that clear as well. Next slide. And so even with that historic funding commitment, elevator construction and retrofitting our old stations is very challenging for a number of reasons. I'll highlight just a few of them. There's a list on the left, but just with the images, we have very narrow platforms, we have narrow sidewalks, and with some of our elevated stations, I know there's not so many of them in Manhattan, but a few very narrow clearance between some of our buildings and our elevated stations. And then lastly, and probably most prominently, is our underground infrastructure that whenever we're going through a sidewalk to build an elevator is always one of the most challenging parts of a proposal. And, relocating those utilities is extremely costly, extremely time consuming. And that's even if it's all as planned and we open up the sidewalk and there's nothing that's a new fun surprise utility line. So that is a big part of the process that, sometimes keeps us even further from.
And I said,
and so that is something that keeps us farther from accessibility, even after we have the funding in place. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to DCP now to talk a little bit more about the existing zoning and the rest of the proposal.
Thanks, Howie. Hi, I'm Angela Blissio from the Transportation Division at City Planning. So today's zoning tools are in place to help alleviate some of the burdens for constructing transit improvements that Howie just went through. Both transit easements and station improvement bonuses support the development of transit improvements and ensure a greater coordination and alignment between new developments and transit station needs. Next slide, please. First of these zoning tools, easement provisions address the challenges of locating new station entrances and other transit amenities. An easement is a small permanent space reserved in a building for a transit agency, in this case the MTA, to use in the future. And transit easements have traditionally been used to provide space for station entrances or passageways or ancillary facilities that support subway lines and emergency egress or ventilation structures. However, in the zoning resolution today, these provisions have very limited coverage and only apply in a few areas of the city, such as along the 2nd Avenue subway, 2nd Avenue for the 2nd Avenue subway line, and most recently in the Special Inwood District. And also, the zoning resolution does not currently provide a sort of consistent citywide approach for facilitating transit easements on development sites around transit stations. And as a result of these limitations, there have been missed opportunities for the MTA to locate ADA access at the best locations on development sites near stations. Next slide, please. So the second zoning mechanism in the zoning resolution is a transit bonus, and those support the creation of transit improvements. In the densest commercial districts in the city, we've incentivized developers to provide both the space and to construct the station improvements, including ADA access through floor area bonuses that provide additional development rights. But as with easement provisions, transit bonus mechanisms are also limited to a handful of areas near our central business districts. And within this limited geography, only sites that are right next to subway stations can take advantage of the standard improvement bonus. And additionally, the current process associated with obtaining a transit bonus involves considerable public review, and this adds time and risks to the development schedule. And so all of these factors together have limited the number of subway applications that we've seen to date. Next slide, please. So to address some of these limitations in the current zoning, we are proposing zoning for accessibility. ZFA is a citywide zoning framework that creates more opportunities to increase accessibility throughout the transit system. Next slide, please. So as Howie mentioned, the first part of this proposal is a system-wide easement requirement that would assist the MTA with identifying opportunities for locating future station entrances. As part of this requirement, all developments and enlargements on zoning lots within 50 feet of mass transit stations and in applicable zoning districts would need to file an application with the MTA and the chair of the City Planning Commission to determine whether an easement on a zoning lot is needed to help facilitate access improvements in the future. And in this case, applicable zoning districts include residence districts that support multifamily apartment buildings, which include all districts at or above R5 with commercial overlays and R5D districts. And also medium and high density commercial and all manufacturing districts. And just to note, while the process of obtaining a certification would be required for most sites within 50 feet of a transit station, it's really anticipated the MTA will only be asking for easements in very limited places that are sort of best suited for future transit station access. Next slide, please. But these easements can affect development sites in a number of ways. The easement itself takes up floor space, and this can reduce available floor area for the development site. The size and shape of the easement can occupy a large amount of space in the building envelope, and this affects the direct area that's occupied by the easement, and also has implications on sort of construction feasibility. Easements can restrict available space to provide ground floor uses and parking. And depending on the type of development, they may create compatibility issues with sensitive uses such as apartment uses and residential uses. And so without any zoning relief, easements can limit the construction of a development to its full potential in certain situations. So if the provision of an easement makes it challenging for a development to get built, it'll be much more difficult for the MTA to acquire these easements. Next slide, please. So in order to facilitate agreements in the future, we're proposing targeted relief from certain zoning limits that would be provided to minimize potential challenges for the construction of the site subject to this easement requirement. And so we have 5 general categories of relief. The first is floor area and open space relief, and this is intended to allow developments to be constructed without losing their permitted buildable floor area due to the easement, and to provide greater flexibility for locating easements and station area and station connections in the future. And these provisions would generally apply across all zoning districts. So this set of relief includes floor area space, floor space contained within any easement volume would be excluded from the definition of zoning floor area. Transit easements would be treated as permitted obstructions, and lot coverage would be increased in certain districts. Next slide, please. Second, the proposed height modifications would provide targeted building envelope flexibility in districts governed by maximum building height limits. So sites that provide an easement would be able to increase their maximum height by 10 feet. In R7 districts and above, maximum heights would be increased by 20 feet for developments that provide an above grade easement specifically. And street wall flexibility would be provided within 15 feet of an easement area to provide greater flow around easements. Next slide, please. Third, relief would be provided to minimize potential conflicts between the easement area and the space needed for required parking. A deduction of 15 parking spaces would apply to all developments and enlargements. And parking would be waived on sites with a lot area of 10,000 square feet or less in districts with higher parking requirements, and on sites with a lot area of 15,000 square feet or less in districts with a lower parking requirement. Next slide, please. Fourth, use allowances are also proposed to activate spaces and future station entrances that will enhance the surrounding environment. So to activate easement spaces in the time before the MTA builds out the improvements, proposed modifications would allow transit easements to be temporarily occupied by any permitted use except residential use. And in residence districts, local retail uses would be permitted as a temporary use. Additionally, local retail uses would be permitted within 30 feet of an easement in residence districts and within 30 feet on the second floor where above grade easements are provided. And similarly, permitted commercial uses would be allowed on the second floor where above grade easements are provided on sites with mixed use buildings in commercial districts. And also to allow for commercial space to be accommodated more easily on sites with above grade easements, such uses on the second floor would be allowed up to 30 feet in height within the rear yard. Next slide, please. So finally, modifications to streetscape requirements would be provided to align streetscape features with station entrances. Easements would be excluded from general streetscape provisions. And to ensure the safety of a transit user entering and leaving a station, curb cuts would be restricted within 30 feet of an easement. Next slide, please. So in addition to the proposed regulations, additional relief may be needed to address very unique site conditions that may create challenges for providing an easement. So to allow additional flexibility, we're proposing further use, bulk, parking, loading, and streetscape modifications available pursuant to a discretionary review and approval. And so depending on the amount of relief that is requested, modifications would either be subject to an authorization that would allow for a height increase of up to 25%, or through a special permit if a height relief is needed, if more height relief is needed. Next slide, please. And also, while the easement requirement only applies to developments and enlargements on sites with a lot area of at least 5,000 square feet in applicable zoning districts, easements may also be provided voluntarily on other sites in those same applicable zoning districts. So on small sites with a lot area of less than 5,000 square feet, the same set of relief applicable to the required sites would apply to developments and enlargements providing an easement. And on sites with an existing building that is being converted, targeted relief could be provided to facilitate the provision of an easement area within an existing building. And in other instances, the transit agency may need additional sidewalk space or clear path around an existing or future station entrance rather than an easement. And so where a clear path is provided, street wall flexibility would apply. And so now I'm going to pass the presentation over to Chris Lee, who will go through the proposed transit bonus part of the proposal.
Thanks, Angela. So the second component of the proposal is an expanded transit bonus program that would be optional for sites that are approximate to a mass transit station. To address the limitation of today's subway bonus mechanism, the proposed transit bonus program would continue to grant a floor area of up to 20% of the maximum floor area ratio for developments and enlargements that construct station improvements, but expand the geography of areas where a transit bonus may be used to other high density areas. Such floor area bonus would be subject to a simplified discretionary review and approval process in the form of an authorization by the City Planning Commission. Next slide, please. As with today's subway bonus special permit, a floor area bonus of up to 20% could be earned for eligible sites by providing significant station improvements. The types of improvements that could be provided through the new transit bonus would be similar to the improvements that could be provided through today's bonus mechanism. These improvements have, for the most part, been provided in the form of significant accessibility and circulation improvements. So in the case of 45 Broad Street, the latest application that was approved for a subway bonus special permit, 2 ADA accessible elevators were proposed for the north and southbound platforms of Broad Street Station on the JZ line, along with the replacement of fare arrays in 2 control areas on the southbound platform of Wall Street Station on the 4-5 line to increase passenger entry and exit counts. The amount of bonus floor area that was generated on the 45 Broad Street site was approximately 70,000 square feet. While a larger zoning lot seeking the bonus could generate a larger amount of bonus floor area than a smaller zoning lot, the scope and size of improvements to be provided would need to be commensurate with this amount. In other words, a larger zoning lot would need to provide more improvements than a smaller zoning lot applying for the bonus. The proposed bonus would include safeguards in the form of findings by the Commission to ensure that the amount of improvements corresponds with the amount of additional floor area being proposed. Since the proposed program has wider applicability beyond a specific area in the city, the types of improvements needed would vary, and the evaluation of such improvements and bonus floor area by the Commission would continue to be discretionary. I should note that quantified bonus programs for transit improvements only exist in specific areas where such improvements are predetermined and part of an existing area plan, like in East Midtown. Given the predictability of the types of improvements and amount of floor area that is being merited, such quantified bonus programs have been applied as of right. In this case, because the bonus has wider applicability, improvements and the amount of floor area that could be generated are not predetermined and therefore subject to discretionary review and approval, just like in today's subway bonus special permit. Next slide, please. The new bonus authorization would expand the applicability of the existing subway bonus to all R9 and R10 districts in the city, their commercial equivalent and M16 districts. In addition, it would also allow sites that are within 500 feet of a station to participate in the program in exchange for an offsite improvement that could be provided or constructed at a station that is not immediately adjacent to the site. Within central business districts, including Midtown, Garment Center, Hudson Yards, and Lower Manhattan, such offsite improvements may be provided within a distance of 1,500 feet from the development site. Next slide. So generally, where other citywide floor area bonuses are available, the transit bonus could not be stacked or used with other bonuses. However, in areas where voluntary inclusionary housing bonuses are available, the transit bonus could be used in addition to inclusionary housing. Sites could either use the inclusionary housing bonus exclusively, use the transit bonus exclusively, or use both inclusionary housing bonus and transit bonus. The same options would not be available where sites are located within mandatory inclusionary housing areas, as MIH would continue to be a requirement regardless of the transit bonus.
All right, can I jump in there and ask a question, please? It's Lowell Kern from CB4.
Hey, well, that's, we're trying to save questions for the end of the presentation, if that's okay.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you.
To maximize the amount of transit improvements that could be provided through this program, the additional floor area generated from the transit bonus would not be subject to inclusionary housing requirements. Next slide. This slide illustrates the 3 options that I just mentioned for voluntary inclusionary housing and the transit bonus. Essentially, the proposed transit bonus is designed to work with voluntary inclusionary housing. The transit and affordable housing bonuses could be used individually or in combination to ensure that the availability of the transit bonus does not limit use of the affordable housing bonus. One thing to note is that the voluntary inclusionary housing program would have many built-in advantages that we believe would make it the primary choice for increasing floor area as compared to the transit bonus. The notable difference is that voluntary inclusionary housing is an as of right bonus, whereas the proposed transit bonus would still require discretionary review at the City Planning Commission, environmental review, referral to community boards and borough presidents, preparatory planning with the transit agency, as well as the actual construction and maintenance of improvements with a significant cost. Next slide. And this map over here illustrates where the transit bonus intersects with voluntary and mandatory inclusionary housing areas. The dark blue and red shaded areas represent the coverage area where of the transit bonus within areas where mandatory inclusionary housing is mapped, as shown in the light blue area, and where voluntary inclusionary housing bonus is available, as shown in pink. And as I mentioned previously, sites within mandatory inclusionary housing areas would continue to be subject to inclusionary housing requirements, as MIH is not an option but a requirement. Next slide. Outside of voluntary inclusionary housing, there are two other limited instances where the transit bonus could be stacked. Within the core sub-district of the special 125th Street district, the transit bonus may be used in addition to the visual or performing arts or VPA bonus. Since the VPA bonus is treated similarly as inclusionary housing bonus in the special district, in that developers have the option of choosing either bonuses today, the transit bonus would also be designed to work with the VPA so that both bonuses do not compete with one another. As with inclusionary housing bonus, the transit bonus could be used singly or in combination with VPA. Next slide. Also, in subdistrict A2 in Garment Center and in subdistrict C and E within Hudson Yards, the proposed transit bonus could be used in combination with the district improvement bonus to create more opportunities for improving 34th Street Station or the 42nd Street Port Authority Station. The transit bonus, however, may only be used after floor area increase generated from the district improvement bonus has been fully utilized. The area in purple shows where the bonus would apply within the Special Garment Center District and Special Hudson Yards District. Next slide.
Can you slow down a little bit on that?
Sure. Did you want me to go back to the previous slide, or?
I'll ask questions and have you go back on the stacking.
Sure. So as with easement sites, modifications to other zoning provisions would be available pursuant to additional discretionary review and approval. Modifications may either be subject to an authorization that would allow a height increase of up to 25% for developments that are subject to contextual heights or maximum building height limits, or through a special permit if further height relief is needed. Other height or other relief that would be made available through discretionary review and approval include modifications to use, parking, loading, and streetscape rules. Modifications pursuant to the authorization or special permit would be subject to specific findings. Next slide. So in summary, zoning for accessibility is an additional tool that will bring us closer to making all stations accessible. And it proposes a system-wide easement requirement that would require all new developments within 50 feet of MTA station and other mass transit stations within the applicable zoning districts to seek a certification determining if they must provide an easement. This is the only non-discretionary review being proposed. It is also proposing an expansion of the transit improvement bonus program, which allows a floor area bonus in exchange for significant transit improvements through an authorization. And finally, it is proposing additional discretionary actions that would allow for further zoning modifications. Next slide. And this is where we are today. The application was referred out last month by the commission, and we are currently in public review. We are in the process of presenting this application to all 59 community boards, and we welcome your comments, feedbacks, and recommendations. So a public hearing will be held at the commission, followed by a commission vote sometime after, and the application will move on to City Council for potential adoption in the fall. And this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Howie, and thank you, Angela. Thank you for your time. We're going to go straight into the Q&A session. I know we have several questions, but before we're going to start the Q&A session with some questions from the Borough President's Office. The Land Use Director, Lizette Chaparro, is going to kickstart us. If chairs have questions, please go ahead and use the raise hand function. And once Lizette is done, we'll continue with that session, okay? All right, take it away, Lizette.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I just have a question about improvements that would be at the street level and sort of what the design guidelines and interagency coordination would be in those sites. And I'm thinking in particular in historic districts. So to what extent would the LPC or even the Public Design Commission be those improvements?
Sure. Howie, feel free to jump in. If a site is within a historic district or if it's a landmark site, then it would continue to be subject to LPC review. So that's how it works today, and that's how it'll work if ZFA gets approved. In terms of PDC review, it really depends on whether a development is being proposed on a city-owned land or property, or if a transit improvement would essentially warrant some kind of or involve city-controlled property, but it just really depends on the land ownership and whether the city controls that land. And if that's the case, then yes, a PDC would review that application. But generally speaking, transit improvements would not be subject to PDC review.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Lizette?
And we can jump into the several hands raised.
Okay. Janine Kiley, followed by Russell Squire, followed by Lowell Kern.
I have a number of questions that our land use committee came up with. The question, so this would make everything as of right with no increases in bulk and height and FAR without any public process. So I just wanted to understand how, if any, the public would be involved in this. And then, I mean, I can send all of these questions over to Lizette as well, but I guess the question we're wondering about is the stacking issue, which I was addressed in the presentation, but it sounds like, so in Hudson Square, we have voluntary inclusionary housing, so you will get the bonus from that plus the MIH bonus. And then our other, I guess that's not really a question. Our concerns are is there any consideration for encroachment into rear yards in residential districts? We didn't see anything like that. And then there were lots of words about FAR and bulk and height increases and using the words major and significant. And we want to know if those could be further defined. And then we want to know if there's an if you can institute some kind of mechanism that guarantees that developers do not receive the FAR bonus and then either deliver an unusable station or it's just additional retail space for a significant period of time. To want to make sure that the actual ADA improvements really happen in a timely manner. So I know that's a lot, but thank you.
Russell?
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions. The first question is, why isn't the easement requirement applicable to all zoning districts? Why is there a subset above which it's applicable?
That's a very good question. Thank you for thank you for your question. So generally speaking, we are making this a requirement for zoning districts that support multifamily dwelling units, as well as their commercial equivalents and all manufacturing districts. And it's just really very much a question of use compatibility. It doesn't really make sense to require an easement on a site that is only allowing for single or two family dwelling units. So that's our general approach for the easement component of zoning for accessibility.
And so to put a finer point on that, Russell, we basically the zoning limitations on the easement are not really applicable. In Manhattan, it's more in outer boroughs and even farther out in the outer boroughs where that becomes more of an issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. My other question is, and I guess this, I think, relates to some of the concerns that Janine just raised. If there's going to be like an FAR substitution, essentially, where there's been a, accessibility added in a development, it seems to me, wouldn't that also potentially add height, so that if you have a height increase on top of that, aren't you sort of doubly adding height if you're allowing a height increase in addition to the FAR provision there?
Sorry, just for my own clarification, are you referring to the easement component of zoning for accessibility?
No, the other component.
Oh, so you're talking about the bonus, right?
The bonus.
So there are a couple of discretionary acts, or a few discretionary actions that we're proposing as part of the bonus program. There's the authorization for a floor area increase, and that doesn't necessarily guarantee an increase in height. In fact, it only allows for a floor area increase. If a bonus site wants additional height, they would have to apply for another action, either through an authorization or a special permit. And the authorization would allow for up to 25% of a height increase for contextual districts or in areas where there is a building height limit. And the reason for that is so that they can fit, and they will have to demonstrate that it's the minimum extent necessary of height relief that would allow them to fit all their additional floor area that is being generated through the provision of transit improvements. Does that make sense?
So yeah, but if I'm understanding correctly, then again, if you've got a floor area increase, couldn't that be applied through the addition of height? In which case the height provision is that not right?
No, it's very much separate. I mean, the floor area increase does not necessarily guarantee additional height. In certain cases, it may warrant additional height. But again, if a development site wants additional height, and if they see that the zoning regulations does not allow them to fit the 20% or up to 20% floor area for various reasons, whether it be the maximum height limit in their district, they would have to apply for that additional authorization or special permit for them to fit the floor area bonus.
Okay, thank you.
Lowell, followed by Tammy, then Stephen Brown, and then Layla Law Gisco.
Okay. Good morning. I got a couple of specific issues that relate to our district. Specifically for the Clinton Special District, we have granted additional development rights previously, but only if the inclusionary housing bonus remained the priority. And I heard you say, and I believe my land use committee believes, that in certain cases, the developer would be allowed to elect the accessibility bonus in lieu of the inclusionary housing bonus, and we are opposed to that. Given what is going on in our district, the inclusionary housing bonus must be applied first. They've got to stick to that before they take on any other bonuses, because we need the housing. So that's the first thing. We would be opposed to this if the developer is allowed to elect the accessibility bonus in lieu of the inclusionary housing bonus, particularly in the Clinton Special District. We had negotiated transfer of development rights to the west side of 8th Avenue. Only if the inclusionary housing bonus remain the priority. We expect that to remain the priority and cannot support this if the inclusionary housing bonus is not the priority. Second, for the Hudson Yards District, you want easements from them, that's fine. They don't get any more bonuses. Hudson Yards District has already been provided one of the largest upzonings of any district in the city's history, probably. When the district was created, they don't get any more bonuses. It's large enough as it is. Finally, for anything that's deemed a large-scale project, this should be forced to go back to the community boards for review. It shouldn't be of his right just to go straight to city planning. The community board should have some input. That's it.
Any comments?
Yeah, they don't like me, Rosie.
I just to your. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I just want to mention that the bonus applications would be referred out to the community board, so it wouldn't be as of right. It's subject to an authorization, which is subject to discretionary review and approval, and there would be a referral to the community boards.
All right, well, that takes care of point 3.
Yeah, and that's true of any bonus application that we're talking about, regardless of kind of the relief they're seeking and what kind of station improvement. Any bonus application goes through community board review.
Okay. Any comments about my first 2 points?
We welcome any feedback and comments and recommendations at this point during.
All right, Lizette, I've already sent it to you, but I guess we'll send this in directly.
Yeah, and Lowell, I guess I would just add to your first point, understood the concerns and, where there, as discussed in this slide previously, where mandatory inclusionary housing exists, that's, of course, it is mandatory as stated. But, where VIH, voluntary inclusionary housing, is a provision, as we've laid out, we try not to, they can both be used, but it is, up to the developer. We understand the concern.
Yeah, we have an objection to that. If it's voluntary, they have to take inclusionary housing first. Our district sees that as the #1 issue that we are facing. And while we're not opposed to accessibility, we think it's great. The housing issue is the #1 priority for our community district. And we don't want developers to have a way to go around it.
I just also want to make another comment about inclusionary housing. Where inclusionary housing and transit bonus are available and the developer gets to decide inclusionary housing, transit, or a combination of both. As I mentioned in my presentation, that voluntary inclusionary housing would likely be the primary choice because today it is an as of right bonus. It's not subject to discretionary review or approval, whereas the transit bonus is discretionary and would require transit improvements, which can cost a lot of money for the developer. It's also subject to environmental review, and and they would have to coordinate with the MTA to make sure that the improvements that they're proposing and designing are up to the standards and would facilitate accessibility at those stations.
Understood, but there may be reasons a developer would rather go that route than be stuck with inclusionary housing that's going to carry on long after the project is finished, and that's not acceptable to us.
Okay, Tammy?
So this is, in a way, I feel like this is a little bit of a cart before the horse question, but what other mechanisms were looked at by EDC in the city versus a handout on land use? So in so many things that we've done for over the years, were tax credits considered? What other kind of incentives were considered and overlooked for the developers versus stacking bonuses? That's my first question.
I think, excuse me, I think this might be an appropriate talking point for Howie at the MTA, because one of the mechanisms that they have in advance of this is the capital program. And so this is a tool that we're proposing to sort of support the capital program. But you can speak a little bit to, that is a much more encompassing proposal.
Sure. So I guess, I don't know if this quite answers the question, Tammy, but, of course, this is in addition to the capital plan. And we are seeking to make every station across the system accessible as quickly as possible. And so we're continuing to fund that. We opened, I think, 11 new ADA stations last year. We're on pace to maybe even beat that this year. And which is the most we've ever done. And so continuing to look at different tools where we can speed that up, make that more quickly. And so this is one of the tools that has been around for a long time in the form of the transit bonus and the easement that's been on the 2nd Avenue subway. Both of those, help us to make the system accessible more quickly, but are underused or very limited in their applicability. And this was something that was raised by City Council Speaker Corey Johnson in his State of the City in 2019. And that kind of led to a renewal of this idea and how we can improve it and make this help build our system and get us to system-wide accessibility much more quickly. And so this is kind of the primary tool that we use to work with developers to add accessibility and other enhancements to our station. And I will turn it over to Moonstone Park, also from the MTA, to add to that.
But here's a question. You said Munson, I apologize. Let me just, for what Howie said, you consulted with developers on the program, is what you're telling me, to create a better program for the developers. So this is the first part of the public review. And what I'm asking is the city, what mechanisms did they look at that were not sole land use decisions to provide opportunities to incentivize the program to be taken. Because a lot of the questions that we have and the concerns we have, everybody wants accessibility. No one doesn't want it. And where you're putting the community board is by telling us, oh, don't worry, they have to come to the community board. I think in the last year, we have all experienced community board review that was holistically ignored by the city in certain projects. So review is meaningless if your voice is unheard, even after hours and hours of countless hearings and meetings and everything else. So I'm asking what mechanisms the city looked at that would be able to benefit the program that currently exists to incentivize developers through financial means that did not include land use. Very, very specifically. So were there tax incentives looked at? Were there other financial mechanisms? How could you have made it better instead of using the bluntest tool that is now being shown to the community boards? Because everything seems to be a FAR bonus, there are so many great questions that have come before me. So I'm asking the ones that have nothing to do with land use, because we're in a no-win situation. Really, it is a no-win where you're putting the community boards. So I'm a little frustrated by this. And who determines what is considered major or significant? Is that an internal decision at DCP? Is that something that when they're stacked, if one is minor, but by the multiple stacking, it becomes major? What triggers that definition? So I'm just trying to understand the breadth and depth of where we are and how we got here, because I know for certain that there was no think tank that included any of the community boards on here in terms of how we feel about it before it was presented as fait accompli.
Hi, Tammy. First, because I was involved in the last few years on the thinking behind zoning for accessibility. First, developers weren't consulted in the crafting of this proposal. I want to put that out there. This came out of a lot of missed opportunities, especially for the MTA to work with developers on securing space for necessary easements for elevators around the city. And because of that, now we're going to be in a situation where we have to locate elevators in locations where they're just not optimal, or they're going to be leading to more circuitous paths for elevator users, and also be much more expensive. We're trying to avoid sidewalk bump outs to the best we can, and then we have to coordinate with DOT, so we don't even know. So getting these spaces within buildings is really the optimal choice. And that's the big origin for this program. But as Howie mentioned, this really came out of the 2019 Zoning for Transit Accessibility Report by the City Council, and it had zoning recommendations. And so I do appreciate your question, like what are the other tools out there? But this is a zoning proposal, so we are.
But this is what we want to know. We want to know, other than zoning, what other options are there, and what other options could be considered? Because, quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's lovely to come to the community board. But even if the community board looked and said, you're putting the community board in a position, we all want accessible stations. I think everybody wants it. But to have people told in a community environment, which happened in CB1, if you don't support this, you're anti-accessibility. Even if you're in a historic district, you're in this district, for whatever reason, it puts the community board and the people who live there who don't think that land use is the right tool in a no-win position ever. We went through this in Community Board 1, and members of my board who I know were told, well, if you don't support this, there are people on the call saying, if you don't support this, you're anti-accessibility. You're making sure that people can't get jobs. And it wasn't about that. It was about a specific site, a specific thing. and asking what other methods, and being told that there are no other methods because this is the way the zoning and the laws are. So I'm asking for other things.
Right. It is about accessibility, but it is also about improving the streetscape, not just in congested parts of Manhattan, but also in the other boroughs where you have a lot of elevated stations. So it's about accessibility, but it's also about improving the overall environment for neighborhood residents.
So I'm going to ask the question. The question is, are there any other tools and have they been looked at? So the answer is,
I think the answer is we'll get back to you.
okay. Stephen Brown, followed by Layla.
Yeah, I just want to give some feedback, and I'll be brief because I think a lot of the points that I would make have been previously made. I think the couple points I would make is, number one, that our land use has looked at this extensively, and I want to thank both the city planning and MTA who have presented to us. So we're going to have a resolution, and we'll get that to you. So it'll be very specific. But we have, again, to Tammy's point, everyone supports accessibility. We have a very large senior population, and we do as well. But we have some concerns as well along the bonuses and the stackings. I think one of the number one things came out is the word improvements is very, very vague. And we would like to see that much more defined and directly tied to what is available. And I think the spirit of what you're hearing here is that people are concerned that this will be used by developers, or should say abused. So we want to make sure that there is a lot of accountability for what moves forward. But we will follow up with a detailed resolution on this in the near future. Thank you.
Layla?
Yeah, thank you so much. Community Board 5 looked at this application a couple of weeks ago, and I have some follow-up questions. The first one's sort of like technical. Has MTA prepared a list of these upgrades? And if so, can this be shared with us? My other question is, how do you measure the distance from a subway station to the development side? There's a little bit of uncertainty, but I've heard that actually any area of the subway station can be used as a measurement point. So, you know, like if the janitor's closet behind the track is the closest distance to the development side, that could count. It doesn't have to be to the entrance, and then, you know, that would expand the radius, especially at Midtown where it's 1,500 feet. My third question that echoes some of the comments of my colleagues is about the definition of what these upgrades have to be. And, you know, furthermore, can you actually clarify here that they are limited to accessibility upgrades? And that improvements that do not relate to accessibility would not qualify to generate this bonus. And on that same theme, can you actually tell us what criteria and what standards will be used by the Commission and by the Department of City Planning to actually determine what is a commensurate accessibility investment as it relates to the bonus? And I want to put that in the context of the fact that, you know, in Community Board 5, we deal with very savvy developers, and, you know, so is the case in all the districts in Manhattan. They have become experts at lot mergers. And if all of a sudden a 20% bonus is applied to a lot that has been merged with, let's say, all the other lots on the block, it happens in our district, trust me, then we would end up with overstimulation of density that would be packed on one particular receiving site and would create an enormous tower. So we believe that it is not a good idea. You know, as Tammy has said, you know, I think that you're using the bluntest tool in your toolbox to solve a problem that will alleviate some of our issues, but not all of our issues. And that will put a burden that is undue on our district with, over density, which we're already dealing with. So, I think you're hearing it loud and clear. We are in favor of accessibility, but the burden of this density that you're putting in our district, using our blocks as a cash machine, is something that is really problematic to us. If you could really address, how you measure the distance and how you define the upgrades and whether they're limited to accessibility, and finally what criteria you're going to use, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure, so I can answer a few of those questions. So in terms of distance and how that's measured, generally it's measured from the station envelope. So kind of the outside, from kind of the public parts of the station, most prominently from, kind of around the platform and around any entrances and exits. So the shapes are generally kind of straightforward of what they look like. They're kind of long and follow the platform, but sometimes can look a little differently. But we have those files. We can share them in terms of what it looks like for every station across the city. And so it's somewhat, you can look at how that's measured and how that looks like, if that makes sense. So it's kind of the station envelope, and that's used for the measurement for both the bonus distance and the easements distance. In terms of ADA improvement, so if any station is not currently ADA accessible, ADA accessibility must be the first improvement made to a station under the bonus or with the easement program as well. And so with those improvements, there can be other factors. For example, you could build a elevator and a new staircase where there is a need for further circulation just generally at a station, because we're looking to solve, at a number of stations, there's a number of issues right now. It's most prominently, there might not be accessibility, but also it might be overcrowded. It might lack proper circulation for just all customers overall right now. If there's lines to get in and out of a station at rush hour, we're seeking to alleviate things like that, as well as more technical issues we have at stations generally through this proposal. But accessibility has to be the first thing we are doing at a station in both of these programs. And
so
will also be,
a station that is already accessible could benefit from this bonus?
Yep, a station that's already accessible could benefit from this bonus. And the last thing I was going to say is that we'll also be looking at redundant elevators and redundant accessibility features as well at these stations.
Would you consider amending the text to limit it to accessibility? Because it looks like, if anything can be deemed an improvement and generate a 20% bonus, we're doomed. We're just doomed.
So accessibility is the most prominent part of this, but our stations, as we've talked about, are extremely old, and there's a number of things that they could benefit from. So thinking about different, passageways, different connections and transfer points that have been built under the bonus, thinking particularly of 53rd and Lex and that station complex that was connected with a passageway through a bonus that has been a really important piece of that station complex. And I think Moonson wants to jump in here.
Thanks, Howie. The issue of a redundant elevator, it's not as straightforward as it sounds, because in some cases, even though a station may be considered fully accessible, sometimes the path of travel is actually a very circuitous path between elevators. For example, if you want to make a transfer. And so sometimes actually having another elevator will avoid an elevator user taking 2 or 3 elevators just to go in a certain direction. So actually adding an elevator will avoid those additional elevator trips just to make a certain transfer.
Can you actually provide us with a list of MTA upgrades that you have identified for this proposal?
So as I mentioned in the presentation, this is a bonus mechanism that does not apply is not specific to an area like East Midtown. So there are no predetermined improvements, and that is.
But I'm sure that in the there's a $5 billion capital improvement for subway stations as you presented, from the get-go. I'm sure that the MTA has done their homework and that they know their stations, they know where the needs are, and we would be interested in seeing this data.
We can take that back and see what we can share.
Okay, I have to say that, yeah, I'm not going to say anything. Moving on, can you also share the criteria and the standards that are going to be used to determine what is deemed commensurate and how this process is going to happen?
Turn that one over to DCP.
So just to get a sense of what we mean by significant, there's actually a report on our website that kind of talks through and provides examples of previous subway bonus applications that have been approved. So we can share a link and provide that link to you just to get a general sense of
I'm sorry, my question is very specific. In your presentation, you said the improvements will have to be commensurate to the lot size, meaning that this is the provision that you have in place to avoid overstimulation, what is the biggest concern for Community Board 5. We really believe that by putting a plan like that in place, offering a 20% bonus to a lot size is going to overstimulate actually demolition, possibly in our district, and insane lot mergers to actually increase the lot size to get the largest possible bonus. Your response to that is to say, don't you worry, because the upgrade would have to be commensurate. So we would like to know how that is going to work. What is going to be the standard to determine this commensurate bonus?
Again, this bonus application or bonus mechanism that we're proposing, it's discretionary in its review and evaluation of improvements. But again, and it really is an expansion of the existing subway bonus mechanism, which is again discretionary. It's a discretionary action. But if in the past, when we've said commensurate and significant improvements, they're not just simple bike racks or just small little types of improvements. We're talking about massive elevators, elevator upgrades, circulation, capacity enhancements. It really involves a whole package of improvements when we talk about what significant means. And so again, the larger a zoning lot is and the larger the bonuses means more improvements would have to be provided. And that will have to be demonstrated to the City Planning Commission. Again, all applications will be referred out to the community boards and you will have a say in a review of those applications and improvements that are being proposed.
Just to reiterate Tammy's point, most of the time, the community board comments are actually not taken into account. So, we very much appreciate the opportunity to comment, but, short of having, a mechanism on our end to actually make our voice heard, our comments are not very meaningful.
If I could just follow up on Chris's comment. I'm from the Transit-Oriented Development Group at the MTA. We're the group that works with the developers, and we work very hard. And we work with their team of consultants and our own engineers to analyze the proposed scope of improvements. Now, obviously, we know what goes into making a particular entrance, or if it's an elevator. And we know that if it's a fairly large zoning lot and they only are offering a certain scope of improvement, that it wouldn't be commensurate. So we have enough experience within our group and also with the core team that we work with at the MTA to know what is commensurate. And if they are asking for a bonus and that particular station just doesn't have sufficient needs to meet up to that bonus size, they won't get that full bonus.
Well, it would be great if you could actually share with us what these standards and criteria are, so that we have a better understanding and we can have a little more predictability on how this test is going to play out for our own district.
Understood.
Thank you.
There are some questions in the chat. CB2, Janine, do you want to read the questions?
Could I
These are
just
for-
jump in with one question before we get to the chat? Sorry about that. Just on maintenance, and in the instances where the developer is required to maintain, for example, the elevator, what are the mechanisms that the MTA has to ensure that repair is done in a timely way, and compel them to take care of it?
Sure, I can answer that, Lizette. So I think people are, somewhat familiar with, issues with private maintained elevators across the system. Generally with this proposal, we expect actually most elevators will be maintained by the MTA. So with the easement proposal, the space is set aside by a developer, and then the MTA comes in and builds that elevator later, and then also maintains that elevator. With the bonus mechanism, now that we're expanding it so you can be 500 or 1,500 feet away from the station itself, it means that in many cases, those improvements are not going to be built on developers' property. And so they're going to be building that improvement either on the sidewalk, a sidewalk elevator, or something completely within the station. They could build a platform to mezzanine elevator, for example, to help make the station fully accessible. And in those cases, when a developer builds it, but it is not on their property, the MTA will also maintain those elevators and enter into a maintenance buyout agreement where the developer will fund the maintenance of that elevator up front, as if they were maintaining it themselves, and cover those costs. So in the limited cases where a developer is through the bonus building the elevator or other improvement, and it is on their property, then the developer in those cases would be maintaining it. And we've learned from these private elevators that we have in the past. And so we have a strict kind of legal agreement that they need to enter into that includes a number of provisions. First, they have to meet or exceed our current reliability standards for the system, which are 96.5% availability rate. They need to open up lines of credit. So if they start reneging on their duties, we have a funding source for maintenance of that elevator and for the replacement of that elevator at the end of its useful life. And then additionally, on their maintenance contract, they need to list the MTA as a beneficiary of that contract, which means that if they do not respond to an elevator outage in a timely manner, the MTA can request their elevator repair team to go and fix that elevator, even if they have not responded or done anything to make that happen. And then lastly, of course, they need to have equipment on the elevator that allows us to track the elevator and all of these things remotely and ensure that they are meeting those standards. So I hope that answered that, Lizette.
Lizette, anything else at this moment?
No, thank you.
Okay, Janine?
I had put my questions in the chat because I think we jumped on to the next community board. You've addressed many of these. I feel like the big concern is just the vagueness of all of this, that defining major and significant, and particularly changes in residential areas, because we have quite a mixed use community. So these rear yard encroachments can be significant in terms of residential light and air. And I want to make sure that these are addressed in this program. I appreciate the need for this space. I mean, near where I live at Broadway, Lafayette, there is the MTA sold land for a new office building, and there's a new entrance, but it's not accessible on former MTA owned land. But if you could further address, how can we get comfortable with some of these vague terms like major and significant? That's sort of.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So generally when we're talking significant improvements, Chris has mentioned that report, and part of the problem with this proposal is through the bonus mechanism that exists right now, there's been very few proposals because of how kind of onerous the process has been, and how limited the stations have been and the sites that can use it have been. But even so, I think it provides a good example. And Chris mentioned at the top, the 45 Broad Street, where the developer built 2 separate elevators and then reconfigured a fair area. And that's kind of when we're talking about significant, that's what we're expecting here. We're not talking about, some new tile and a handrail. We're talking about something that is significant, that really makes a difference in a rider using the station, and a notable difference that, oh, wow, this entrance wasn't here before. This elevator wasn't here before. I'm no longer, stuck on the platform waiting in line to get off because there's not enough staircases. Things that really make a big difference to everyone who's using the subway on a daily basis, or just any one time using or visiting the city. And so that's when we're talking about significant. And part of the vagueness here, I think, is that, across our system, there's such a wide variety of our stations. There's some that are accessible. There's some that aren't accessible. There's some that could use a redundant elevator. There's some that, could use more staircases and other circulation improvements. And so part of that is to allow us to be flexible, and kind of given our stations were, built by, excuse me, 3 different companies and then merged into one system we call the subway system right now. But there's a kind of a history here that means that almost every one of our stations is different from the next one. And so that, understand that it's a little vague, but I think that really is a tool for us to be able to kind of get everything we can from a developer and not limit ourselves to making improvements to these stations that will be significant and benefit our riders when we are or have these opportunities. And I think that was your main question. I don't know. You mentioned your yards.
I can answer that rear yard question. So in terms of rear yard, we're talking about non-residential, commercial or community facility or manufacturing uses in non-straight residence districts that could encroach into the rear yard up to 30 feet. But that's only for sites that are providing an above grade easement that would serve an elevated station. Aside from that, we also have permitted obstructions for just the easement itself. And that is really to provide flexibility for the MTA and the developer to locate that easement and future station access point in the future.
Okay, but the rear yard is only an elevated, for elevated.
When we're talking about non-res, like when we're talking about commercial uses, yes, yeah, it would only be for elevated stations.
Okay. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I'll go through some of these. Community Board 1, Tammy Meltzer asked about providing everyone with the stacking slides for today's presentation. And if DCP can provide stacking examples for the CB to clearly understand how this is going to apply.
All stacking opportunities. So much like we have a zoning map that overlays and shows the zoning, we want to see how this would overlay with other stacking opportunities. So we understand how that is in relation to this current existing zoning. It's very difficult for someone to grasp where, because we've seen zoning for coastal resiliency, there's another one coming. There's a lot of zoning land use tools. And what I would like to prevent is at the end of the year, having somebody turn around and go, wait a minute, how did we get here? And this particular block now can have a 35% bonus above and beyond what is usual and customary when we started the year.
Thank you for your comment. So there were a few slides in the presentation that kind of mapped out where the transit bonus would intersect with voluntary inclusionary housing. And then there were a couple of slides or 2 maps in the presentation that talks about in other limited instances where the bonus could be stacked with other types of bonuses. So we can try and consolidate the maps together and demonstrate something in one single map for you, if that's easier for you to comprehend.
So I think the short answer is we can get that to you, Tammy. I think we've done a lot of the legwork. Understand that on some of these slides, the maps are a little small given our screens at home. So I think that's something we can get to you.
And when is the last date that community boards can submit resolutions on this matter?
So June 14th is the official, 2-month timeline. So any comments, if we can have them by June 14th, that would be best.
Okay.
I have a quick question on the timing. Sorry. We had reached out to our DCP rep and our June meeting is on June 17th. And we were told that that wouldn't be a problem, but I just want to confirm that. And we've asked that question more than once, but it always makes me nervous when it's 3 days after the date.
Understood. And did someone else at DCP want to respond to that? Or then I will just respond, Janine, that I'm sure that will be okay. We prefer it by the 14th, but those few days are not going to be mean that we're not going to review those comments.
Rosie, are we going to do a borough board reso on this? And if so, wouldn't it be next month?
Yes, we're going to be doing a reso on this. Yep.
Yeah.
So yes, it would be next month, and it would be after.
Also be
No, it might.
It's only a few days.
I'm kind of wondering on the timing that Chris is outlining here. It doesn't seem to jive with some of the community boards. And it would make sense to me if all the Manhattan community boards are passing resolutions in May and June, that borough board do it necessarily in July, because it doesn't seem like otherwise you're giving everybody the full process of understanding to be able to have the documents that they need to present at their boards and then come back here. Just one observation.
Yeah, the land use staff has been tracking. I think at this point, the majority of the boards have had one hearing on it. I don't think most of them have at least at the land use committee level had a vote on it. I think this is very similar to what we ended up doing with zoning for coastal flood resilience, where we had to sort of bifurcate, the presentation and then the hearing and vote. So, I think we've been in communication with DCP and anticipate that we would be able to have the vote in June and get the reso out from the borough board a few days after the 14th.
So, Liz said our next borough board would be June 17th, and on that evening, there are usually CB2 and CB9 usually has their full board meetings on the same day as borough board. So we would get it out after the 17th then.
Probably what we'll also do is, we've been tracking all the comments that we've gotten from community boards. So we would be, again, doing something similar to what we did with zoning for coastal flood resiliency, which is send out a draft reso far in advance for the members of the borough board to review before doing the vote. So have as much of the content of that resolution, ready to go. And be in close contact with the few last boards that will be having their vote on the application.
Okay.
Rosie, it's Gail. Do we have a July meeting? Because if we can do it in July, that might give people more time, because the resiliency was not controversial.
Yeah, the thing is that even if we did it in June, Gail, it would be past the deadline. So.
Okay, but all right. Maybe it'll go down then. That's okay. Trying to make it easier for the city. Whether you don't want to, that's okay.
Okay. So just a little housekeeping, and then we're gonna go to calling on people who have questions in the chat or have their hands raised. Since roll call, we've been joined by Barry Weinberg from CB9, Cecily Harris from CB10, and Eleazar Bueno from CB12. Cecily, you had some questions in the chat, so would you like to ask those questions?
Thanks, Rosie. So I know that this is addressing future projects, but is there anything in the works for current projects that are, in progress right now to increase accessibility for those projects? We have one brewing on 125th Street that we would really like to see something there. And of course, we want to continue our fight and our plight to make sure that accessibility is at all of our stations. So is there anything in the works for current projects?
So with current development projects around stations, whether an easement or a bonus, because of kind of the limitations that we have right now, there's really no tools we have besides kind of the goodness of a developer's heart to provide some kind of improvement to a transit station. We have these really, the bonus provision that exists, but it's limited. It doesn't apply to 125th Street. And the easement provision that also doesn't apply to 125th Street. So that's why we're here with this proposal. We think that these are both really good programs. We want to not have these missed opportunities that you're describing at 125th Street, and really ensure that when you're building right next to a subway station, you need to have that subway station in mind and help us make improvements to that station in the future, because surely you will be benefiting from that station. And also it's an important citywide asset that we need to ensure that all New Yorkers, all visitors can utilize, whether they have mobility impairment, whether they have a child in a stroller, and, ensure that the subway system is truly available for everyone. And so I guess my answer is unfortunately not, but we're hoping this proposal is going to prevent situations like that in the future.
Cecily, any other questions?
No, thank you.
Barry Weinberg?
Yeah, this is just to kind of get back to the point that Howie was talking about the, seriousness of the improvements required for bonus FAR. The text amendment itself seems to not really there's no direct link between the actual benefit provided by an improvement and the amount of FAR that would be awarded as bonus. And so you see in 6651B, you see that some of the bonus can be awarded for improvements regarding providing daylight access, retail uses, enhancements to noise abatement, air quality, lighting finishes, or rider orientation in new or existing passageways. That to me, combined with a lack of any sort of, again, prescription for the planning commission to use when kind of figuring out how much bonus FAR to award for an improvement is really weakens, it requires us to put a lot of faith in the planning commission that they'll do what's appropriate or best.
So happy to respond to that, Barry, and understand why the concern given that part of the text. And so, when, again, looking at the examples of bonuses that have been granted in the past, there's never been a bonus that's been granted for just those types of improvements. It's always, for example, the main example here is actually light wells, which provide kind of light into an underground subway station. But it's always been in conjunction with a new passageway, new elevators, things like that, and kind of allow us to have those improvements made when we're also making improvements to accessibility and circulation to the station. And so it is in the text, but we're evaluating these, I guess my previous answer about what serious means, it means those serious improvements like new elevators, new passageways. And when they're building those, if they can make it a more pleasant experience overall by adding a light well or making it, just generally more pleasant, we'd also like to have them do that at the same time.
I get that. Is the understanding that the bonus FAR awarded will always be 20%, or does the commission think that there'll be a range depending on the significance of the impact?
Yeah, there'll certainly be a range. So as Chris has kind of mentioned, it depends on how big a lot is. That changes what 20% means, and changes what the improvements need to be commensurate. with that bonus and the square footage gained from that 20%. And so it is up to 20%. If the improvements that a developer wants to make, are really not commensurate with a 20% bonus, they would get less. And so, we could see a 5%, 10% bonus here, and it just depends on the station, what the needs are, and what the developer is interested in as well.
Got it. And then, I'm sorry if this has been asked before, but that same section 6651 in A subpoint 3 is the provision where for lots that are getting both ZFA bonus and an MIH bonus or a VIH bonus, that the affordability requirement doesn't apply to the additional FAR from ZFA. I understand that we don't want to make housing in competition with development, or with accessibility, but in my mind, if 25% of a development is required to be affordable, that applies to all of the development and is really 5% of the 20% FAR that they get from accessibility being affordable going to kill an accessibility improvement? I doubt it, but why is that in there, I guess?
So just to clarify, mandatory inclusionary housing is not a bonus, it is a requirement. So either way, the transit bonus, whether a development site uses a transit bonus or not, they will be subject to mandatory inclusionary housing. But in involuntary inclusionary housing and mandatory inclusionary housing, if a development wants to also do a transit bonus, that the additional floor area generated from the bonus would not be subject to inclusionary housing requirements, and simply because we want to maximize the amount of transit improvements that could be provided through, through the transit bonus itself, by subjecting the additional floor area generated from the bonus to inclusionary housing would very much erode the incentive for developments to provide for accessibility improvements.
If I could just add to that, for certain size zoning lots, and especially if they're providing, for example, a brand new entrance with stairs, with an elevator machine room, and sometimes even with an entire fare control area, they are putting an additional inclusionary housing, with taking that out, would actually probably make it infeasible for them to do the project. So we have seen certain situations. So it would make it very cost inefficient or cost infeasible for the developer.
And I think just to add to Winston and Chris's points, because the bonus program is optional, I think if we added that provision and made it just generally so the math didn't quite work out for a developer, that they would just not seek to use it. We wouldn't see any of the transit improvements that we were seeking with the bonus program, or any new affordable housing, unfortunately, under the transit provision, because of course, MIH is still mandatory.
I mean, the bonus provision only applies in zoning areas with a density of an R9 or R10 equivalent, right? So that's
Correct.
Already, if MIH applies there, it means it's upzoned to that. And so that's a pretty heftily dense area already. Like the maximum height for an R9A is 17 stories. So I would be impressed that the requirement of affordability on 5% of FAR from the 20% bonus, scotches a project. I mean, we're talking about a serious amount of square footage for these R9 and R10 and equivalent zoning districts.
It depends on the size of the zoning lot, though. If you don't have a very large zoning lot, it may not end up working.
Okay. Vicky Barbaro has a question in the chat about getting these very technical presentations in advance, if the slides could be made available to the board chairs prior to the meetings.
So, so I guess I mean, so in general, we presented a very similar slideshow to almost every community board in Manhattan. I think the exception is Community Board 6, which we're presenting to next week. In terms of just maybe getting this, for example, yesterday, so you could have seen it before we presented it. You know, I think that's something we can shoot for in the future, but apologies that you're seeing it now, and then we will share it after this.
Rosie, it's just sheer frustration on my part because I'll be the first to admit I am not a zoning expert, which is why I asked Layla to join. While the presentation was very comprehensive, it went very quickly, and it was hard to really concentrate when you're, you know, visually looking at something and the discussion has already moved another page ahead. So from my own standpoint, I'm just being very, you know, maybe I'm speaking for others because I don't think all of us have people, you know, have the information and the know-it-all that our land use people do. As I said, that's why I invited Layla here, because I would have to play everything back to her from today's meeting with much difficulty. And granted, we have Zoom meetings now that we can go back and take a look at this, but in the future we may not, which means if she's not at the meeting, or if any of the other board chairs have people on their board that they would like to share the information that was brought forward during Borough Board, they would have had to have been at the meeting. So it's just, as I said, it's frustration on my part. I would love to have seen this ahead of time. I think it would have been more helpful, and I would really be very concerned if Layla had not been here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And if, when you do these other stacking options, to ensure that we can get them to the community board ahead of time so that they can come up with additional questions.
Rosie, I will say that the stacking conversation was not as robust and detailed when the presentation came to CB1. It was gone through very quickly, and there were questions asked that we don't have answers to. And there are questions raised here that we don't necessarily have answers to. So
I think it was even different, Tammy, wasn't it? We were told that you could stack.
Yep, we were too. So
we were told that. So it's very different. And that's why I think it would have been helpful to have seen this and, you know, ahead of time.
And I personally, as chair, would go back to my board. We have our full board meeting next week, and tell them to table the resolution until all the information that we get is brought back to do in land use next month, which then gives me pause because I'm not meeting the deadlines that Lisette is laying out for us. And while I understand where we are in terms of the time frame, as I noted before, I do think that when we're talking about major changes that are permanent, that another month shouldn't make a difference to enable the community boards to have all the information and make a proper, fully throated decision to then come back to Borough Board, because I wouldn't vote on it if we tabled it this month, and my community board would not be able to vote on it June 17th at full board next month.
So I just wanted to add that there are some slides in this deck that we've presented today that are new, that we prepared after we've been to community boards and heard the feedback. For example, Tammy, specifically, as you mentioned, the stacking and the map. So we added that map and did that analysis in response to questions that we heard at different boards. And so that's something, you know, that we put together and added this, but the information overall is the same. So I don't know if there's anything that you felt was different from last time that is kind of the facts. I want to make sure we address that to make sure everything's clear. But generally, of course, we did add that more detail to this presentation after we heard feedback at community boards.
Tammy, Vicky, I think you mentioned that there was some information at your boards that was different from today. Can you just repeat it so that Howie or someone else can address that?
Some of it has to do with the stacking and the clarity, and about, you know, where what applies, what isn't. So I need to just really take the recording from here, spend the time to go back and do a comparison to the recording for what we had, which is slightly unfair for me, again, volunteers, and then present that at our full board to have our community board make a decision as to whether or not they want to table it or they're feeling that they're okay to pass it forward.
Understood. And I guess maybe just to summarize the issue, essentially this bonus can be stacked with voluntary inclusionary housing. And that's really that in most boards, that is the only thing it can be stacked with. And then there are the two exceptions that Chris went through on 125th Street, the VPA bonus, and in Hudson Yards in Garment District, the select sub-districts of those, it can be stacked. And just to clarify, it can't be stacked with, all three of those. It's just can be stacked in coordination with one of those. So.
I think maybe one of the things that may have either changed or been explained differently, and I'll ask Layla if she's still on to back me up on this, had to do with the question of what is significant. I think when our committee heard this, there was much more leeway in terms of significant improvements. Now, I may be wrong, but I don't think that the improvements that were outlined today were only, there were some that were, we believed, much less significant. I could be wrong, Layla, but do you remember that?
Yeah, so at the presentation that we received, the notion that the improvements would have to be commensurate was not really explained. And the quality of the improvements was not also spelled out. So we were really under the impression that they would only apply to accessible improvements. And it was not explained to us that actually Barry just copy pasted the language in the chat, where it basically says that it can be used for enhancements to noise abatement, air quality, lighting, finishes, and rider orientation. That goes way beyond the strict notion of accessibility, and that was not spelled out at the committee level.
Exactly.
And once again, I know we're supposed to read all this material, but quite frankly, right now, CB5 is reviewing 4 EISs. We're talking like 7,000 pages of documents. We're trying, but we really need the applicants to be engaging with us and really spelling out to us what the salient issues are as it pertains to our district.
Sure. And I guess I would just, apologize for anything that at CB1 or CB5 that wasn't explained as clearly as it was today or as you'd expect it to be. And just add to your point, Layla, that, generally we're expecting to use this proposal primarily for accessibility. And that's, where we have a real need in our system. We have other needs, and those will be secondary to accessibility with this proposal. But we see this as a good opportunity to also use this to, improve circulation and really improve our stations overall for all riders, those who need elevators and those who don't as well.
I'm going to tell you, if you were the one driving the types of improvements that are going to happen, I would feel much more comfortable. But this is going to be a developer-driven process. The developer is basically going to say, I want this 20% increase in density. I am going to propose air quality, lighting, and finishes. I am going to get my lobbyists in the room and do my dance and wiggle my way through. And then the CPC will take a vote, and it is going to entirely denature the intention. I think the intention of the text, we all agree, is good. I think that you can, speaking for ourselves, we can see the notion of, a little bit of density for transit upgrades. We've been through East Midtown. We supported it. We get it. But make it work for us as well. Like debug your text. The text is full of bugs. And they are, in my opinion, unintended consequences. You don't mean it to be this way. You don't mean it to give the developer the opportunity to just, slap a couple of light bulbs and voila, they have 20% increase. That's not what you mean to do. We know that. So what I'm telling you and DCP is work with us, hear what we see and take it into account, address the language of the text so that we can have everything. We can have accessibility, which should be really the number one priority. I mean, that's the notion of priority, number one, top, okay? And then we can maybe consider an amendment to the text to add, air quality, lighting, finishes, and all that stuff. You have an entire Manhattan Borough Board here freaking out. So, just help us. That's help us.
Hi,
So
Leila, if I could quickly just respond. The process is not just driven by the developer. The MTA is involved in defining the scope. And we're not here to help the developers. We're here to help the MTA and our customers and the residents and the businesses within the district that the station is located. We are not here to help the developers. We are here to make sure that we get the improvements that we need and that is covered by the zoning resolution. And to the extent—
Let me reiterate my first question. Can you please provide this list of MTA upgrades? To which, the response was a deflective response of, we'll get back to you. Please get back to us.
Of all stations in the city?
I would take what you have on the CD5.
So I'm gonna ask if the community boards can, and Lisette, I'm gonna volunteer you for this because I think you could then condense questions that may be similar. And if a question is unclear to me, it might be clear to you. So I'm gonna ask all chairs, and we'll send something out after this meeting to get any questions to Lisette that you had posed in your meetings and today that we didn't get answers to. And then I'm gonna ask, we'll send it out and I'll ask MTA and DCP to get us answers within 2 weeks prior to the next Manhattan Borough Board meeting. Is that possible? MTA, DCP, is that possible?
Certainly.
Okay, great.
Yes, and please share the presentation with our office, Chris and Howie, as soon as possible, so we can include that with our email to the
Yeah,
chair.
if you can get that to us today, so we can send it to everyone, and then they can use that if they have any additional questions. And they can comb through it at their leisure and get us questions.
Sounds good.
Okay,
No problem.
great. And then we'll let you know when you should get us all your questions submitted to us by chairs so that we can compile them together. Great. Okay. Thank you, MTA, DCP, for today's presentation. Thank you, chairs, for all of your questions, and community board members. We are now going to move to a vote on the resolution of the Exonerated 5 and permanent exhibit for the Exonerated 5 and social justice. And before I read the resolution, I will call on Cecily Harris to say a few words. Cecily.
Good morning again, everyone. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Madam Borough President. I would just like to again thank all the chairs, the Borough of Manhattan, for allowing CB10 to come and present, inviting us, in fact, to come and present this important initiative, this important social justice initiative. And I want to thank you on behalf of our entire board, our Parks Committee, the chair, Karen Ori, who has gone around with me to all of these boards to talk about this important initiative are agencies that we are working with and CBOs, including the Justice for the Wrongfully Incarcerated and the Innocence Project. Again, we are at the very inception of this project, of this social justice initiative. It was sparked by the Exonerated 5, but it is to answer for all of the wrongfully incarcerated, wrongfully accused, and then wrongfully executed people of color, or anyone that is in that situation, especially in low-income communities where they have not been heard. And I am just excited about this because it is not a CB10 Harlem issue. This is an issue that we have taken on as a borough. And as we talk about the social justice initiative, we are depending on all of us to make these changes. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for this resolution.
Okay. April, would you like to read the resolution?
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
One moment. And I just let everyone know, we've also been joined by Karen Ori as well. Okay. Manhattan Borough Board Resolution, Permanent Exhibit Commemorating the Exonerated 5 and Social Justice. Whereas Community Board 10 is facilitating a diverse community-based process towards creating a permanent exhibit to be located in northern portion of Manhattan Central Park to commemorate the Exonerated 5 and social justice. And whereas Community Board 10 established a task force comprised of stakeholders and community partners. The task force held discussions with community residents, stakeholders, elected officials, city and state agencies, and not-for-profit organizations, solidifying broad-based support. And whereas the injustice endured by the Exonerated 5 is not unique, it fits a historical pattern of unjust arrests and wrongful convictions of Black and Latino young men in the United States. Unfortunately, this occurs every day in cities and towns across this country when law enforcement targets Black and Latino people and forces them to experience humiliating and terrifying detentions, interrogations, physical brutality, and unreasonable searches without any evidence of criminal activity. And whereas visitors to New York City and Central Park should be able to reflect on the human cost of institutionalized racism and systemic injustice. And whereas Community Board 10 attended committee meetings and made presentations to Community Boards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 10 in the borough of Manhattan. Each and every community board passed a resolution or wrote a letter of support to establish an Exonerated 5 and social justice permanent exhibit designed to be both compelling and inviting to the viewing experience. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Manhattan Borough Board supports creating a permanent exhibit to the Exonerated 5 and social justice in Manhattan Central Park.
Thank you, April. I'll just say that the second whereas you said Community Board 10, and it actually reads Community Board 12, added to all the other community boards. Having read the resolution, I will call on the members, the voting members. Community Board, first I'll start with Community Board 10.
Thank you, yes.
Community Board 1.
Yes.
Community Board 2.
Yes.
Community Board 3. Community Board 4. I see Community Board 3. Eric, Eric, you can't vote. Community Board 5.
Yes, definitely.
Community Board 6.
In favor?
Community Board 7.
Yes.
Community Board 8.
Yes.
Community Board 9.
Resoundingly yes.
Community Board 11. Community Board 12. Eleazar, are you still on? I don't see any council members on the call. Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. You're muted, Gail.
Yeah, yes.
So the yeses have it, and the resolution has been passed. Congratulations, everyone. I'm very proud of the work that we've all done collectively on this. And thank you, Karen, for all of your work. Okay, we will now move on to chair reports. And Tammy, what month is this?
It's May. It's Community Board 5 who goes first.
Oh my goodness, I forgot all about that. Okay. I just have one, since time is of the essence. It applies to any and all of you who are bike riders. So we heard DOT's Broadway Vision Project to promote pedestrian and cyclist safety, as well as create new spaces for public use. And this is on the Broadway blocks from 21st to 23rd Streets, 38th to 40th Streets, 47th to 53rd Streets. And all three of the proposed block treatments are what is known as slow block treatment by DOT, which utilizes chicanes to slow down automobile traffic while maintaining access for automobiles, pedestrians, and cyclists. So additional changes would include parking regs, relocating existing bike share docks, creating new protective bike lanes, installing a new dedicated left turn bay on 40th Street, new bike corrals, and signal changes to minimize conflicts between pedestrians, cyclists, and automobiles. DOT has agreed to return at the end of the summer to provide an update as to how this goes. And we supported DOT's plans for the street redesigns on Broadway and recommended approval of those changes with a number of requests, which included, we requested signage along the Broadway bike lanes indicating that cyclists must use bike lanes when available. We requested the installation of audible signs on pedestrian crossings to ensure safety of visually impaired pedestrians. The guarantee of vehicle access for residents was requested. And finally, that DOT provide more time going forward to adequately review these kinds of proposals. We got it, a couple of days right before. And with that, I will pass on to Board 6. Thank you.
Kyle?
Oh, thank you, Vicky. So just a couple of quick updates. So the first is CB6 co-hosted, co-moderated a program with DOE at the end of last month about reimagining school going forward. That was really well attended. Really urge, the other chairs, if you'd like to reach out to DOE and do a very similar presentation, because as you can imagine, lots of teachers, principals, parents, and students were active in that conversation. At the same time, with the infrastructure bill that was going on at the federal level, we really pushed with our local Congress representative, Congresswoman Maloney, to focus and get some funding for the East River Greenway gap between 41st and 53rd Street, which has not been completed for a very long time. And so we're really pushing on that and trying to get any kind of funding to get that area completed. And the last update is that we just have a large number of ULURPs coming up in the next couple of weeks. So it'll be a very busy and heavy schedule. And I know some of it is in conjunction with some of the other boards. So definitely urge anybody to come and sit on those meetings as well. Thank you.
Rosie, could I interject? I forgot.
Yes.
Okay. I got so involved with listening and being a part of the discussion that I would like for the record to say that we did pass a resolution on zoning for accessibility, which is one of the 5 upcoming zoning text amendments that are coming before all of us in the next few weeks. As Layla mentioned, we're all going to be super, super busy. And basically, if I could just say again for the record, that we recognize the primary purpose, that we have concerns over the amount of relief provided by the program would be at the discretion of the Department of City Planning, and that it's on a case-by-case basis for chair certification rather than using a set of clearly defined rules, and that the program, as Layla mentioned, could have unintended consequences of over incentivizing density and may not be commensurate with the benefits of the transit improvements. We also mentioned that it does not take lot mergers into account, which may significantly increase the bonus floor area granted to those developments. We unanimously denied the zoning text amendment regarding the easement requirement and bonus program. And we asked to expand the amendment to require transit accessibility improvements and other station enhancements are mandatory for significant developments, that density caps are applied to merge lots in order to ensure that the FAR bonus is kept at an acceptable level, and that the floor area bonuses for lots that are subject to mandatory inclusionary housing rules should include affordable housing units. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Community Board 7.
Thank you. We've had a busy month up here, so I'll just go down a handful of items. Land use, we're going to be a co-applicant with Landmark West as big buildings continue to be a concern, and we are going to be a co-applicant in terms of a proposed zoning amendment to the special Lincoln Square district area over the ABC sites, as we call them, but are also the West 66 and West 67s, which is an unusual, well, I shouldn't say unusual, but something we haven't done in the past, and that's something that we'll give you guys updates on. Education continues to be an issue with our area, and I think we have great concerns that with the DOE in terms of both working in a timely manner for next year, as well as making sure that the decisions are based on science and not politics. And we have a very exciting meeting tonight in which we've got two great speakers. We have Emily Oyster, who is the Brown Professor of Economics, who put out a lot of the early work in terms of what the possible super spreader issues around schooling, as well as a Patricia, well, I should say, Dr. Patricia De La Mora, who is a clinical pediatric. So I think we're trying to get third-party data from outside the system to sort of talk about what is going on in education. Transportation continues to focus on safety. We applaud the letter recently on ATVs from our borough president, and specifically, we're happy to see solutions. We are particularly hit by this area. It is, not to overstate, but somewhat of a plague and something that is a huge issue for us. So we hope that there'll be some action taken. And safety around e-bikes is an issue. Unfortunately, we had an accident with a pedestrian and there was a death with an e-bike. And we have great concerns that the e-bike legislature at the state level was somewhat rushed. I've got great concerns that a motorized vehicle can go 25 miles an hour in bike lanes. And we've got 3 large bike lanes up here. So we'll continue to have that conversation. But again, that's a huge concern in terms of e-bikes in general. Housing in NYCHA continues to always be relevant and at the forefront. There is a June 9th NYCHA hearing that we are going to give testimony on, and we want to continue to advocate for that for all of our developments in the area. And then just an announcement, our senior task force continues to do a really great job, and we're going to have a visioning hearing meeting next week, May 26th. I think will be really, really exciting. And then lastly, we have some exciting news. We've hired a new district manager. So we're extremely excited. I want to thank the Manhattan Borough President and Rosie and everyone who did a lot of work to help us out. So thank you. They made themselves extremely available for a new chair like me who is first time going through this. So thank you. But Michelle Booker will be our new district manager, and we're extremely excited to bring her aboard and hope that there can be maybe some coordination with some of the other community boards in terms of meeting your district managers and it's just maybe a little learn session. So that's our report. Thank you.
Thank you. Community Board 8.
Thank you. The Borough Board meeting last month was before our full board meeting. So I'm going to try and compress 2 months worth of our full board meetings here into my report. So First thing I want to mention is with regard to senior centers. First of all, I just want to thank Gail Brewer for her leadership on this and getting the senior centers reopened. And one of the things that Gail asked us about at our meeting last night, in addition to advocating for trying to get the senior centers reopened, we had a resolution on our agenda, and Gail asked us to circulate that to the other boards. So I think that's one of the items that Rosie circulated to everybody. That version is from our minutes. We just passed it last night, but hopefully it's helpful for folks. And we're trying to get the senior centers reopened and joining that effort. The biggest news, I think, in our district is we're dealing with the blood center redevelopment proposal that's currently in the midst of ULURP. We're currently in the community boards review time period here. For those who don't know, this is a major proposal for a huge tower as part of a mid-block rezoning of an R8B district. So there is a lot of concern and opposition to this from the community. We're fighting it very hard, and frankly, we may need support from people all over the city and all of you to stop this in the council, because it may come down to council approval here. So the precedent that this sets in terms of the mid-block rezoning of an R8B, and also just generally what it means to bring a project like this to a community district over the such united opposition really from everybody in the community, overwhelmingly, I think has implications for everybody. So that's a big thing that we're focused on. Last month, we had several resolutions related to bike access. So we approved permanent crosstown bike lanes in the E60s, and also a proposal for bike access for the Roosevelt Island Bridge. This month, we approved resolutions to fund and expand the Summer Youth Employment Program. Now that the city's coming back, we want to make sure that that program is fully restored, and we're hoping that some of the federal money that's coming from Washington will be able to be used to make sure that everybody who's applied to that will have a chance to have a summer job. We also passed a resolution to address the COVID slide that a lot of kids have been experiencing, because basically the challenges of remote learning has led to what's referred to as the COVID slide in terms of their development, similar to the summer slide in terms of kind of losing ground. And we really want to make sure that that's addressed. We're very focused on composting. So we requested composting drop-off sites be restored to green markets, and also additional composting sites just generally in our district. I am happy to report, others have probably seen this, that street fairs appear to be coming back. We've been approving street fair applications. So it's just very exciting to think about the fact that we're going to be able to enjoy street fairs again very soon. I'll also just give some updates on some of the task forces that we have going on. So we have a congestion pricing task force that was created a long time ago, it seems now, to deal with congestion pricing that was coming down the pike. And now that everything is coming back from COVID, it seems like the congestion pricing is going to go forward again. So we're going to be meeting to try and come up with recommendations for how to ameliorate the effects of that, particularly since our district borders the congestion pricing zone essentially. So we want to make sure that we're providing feedback, and hopefully there are going to be ways to fix the way that that's implemented, that it's not too burdensome on the communities that are adjacent to that congestion pricing zone. Our Kohler task force continues to meet, and I think we really have seen a lot of improvements, particularly recently at the Kohler nursing home in terms of visitation and the ability of residents to leave. And so, I do think that the task force has had some success in really improving things there. So we're very proud of that. And then the last thing is, we had approved back in January a safe haven to come to our district. And now there has been a community advisory group that's been assembled, and that's starting to meet. So that's very exciting as well.
Thank you very much. Community Board 9.
We have had a very big month, I would say. We had a land use hearing with 3 ULURP items. One was a proposal for a 17-story tower on Riverside Drive and 142nd Street, which would tear down two historic townhouses that are not yet designated, but were downzoned in our 2012 West Harlem rezoning. The hearing, those present at the hearing voted unanimously to oppose that. The community board will be ratifying that vote tonight at our general board meeting. And then the other two were zoning for accessibility and the hotel special permit amendment. Our draft resolution put on the agenda for tonight is yes with conditions for ZFA. We support the easement, or the resolution says that we support the easement portion, but we would like specific changes to require any bonus in an affordable housing area also be proportionately affordable, and that minor things like beautification and rider orientation be removed from the proposed text amendment. And again, we'll be voting on that tonight. We also continue to try to work to find a good outcome for a development happening at 1763 Amsterdam Avenue, the former site of Child's Memorial Church of God in Christ, and try to get some deeply permanent, deeply affordable or supportive housing there. And then we have continued to see a rather dramatic improvement in our COVID numbers as our percent of adults vaccinated has crossed the 50% threshold in two of our hardest zip codes, 10027 and 10031. Our positivity rates in both zip codes have cratered from above 6% to 1.5% in 10031 and 0.9% in 10027. So, you know, we were left out of the mayor's initial rollout of vaccination sites. We fought that very hard. We worked very closely with the governor's office to get interim sites, and we still remain about 20% behind the rest of Manhattan's vaccination rate, but we really are seeing a dramatic impact as those vaccines are rolled out. And we're working to continue to get our community vaccinated. There was also a meeting of our strategic planning committee, which focused on getting the youth in our area, particularly in Manhattanville, connected to summer programs and employment, which we believe is going to be crucial for this. We are seeing an uptick in gang-related gun violence, and we're hoping to stop that before it continues to get worse. And then finally, we're holding a vote tonight on support for a series of bills in the state legislature, the Crash Victims' Rights Act, I believe, which deal with state law around traffic, including allowing the city to lower its speed limit in certain areas below 25 miles per hour, I believe. So, and also to, of course, the perennial bill allowing the speed cameras in school areas to be left on beyond the school day, where they are currently required to be turned off. So we've got quite a lot on our agenda. We also contacted over 100 restaurants in our area using Department of Health inspection data to identify them. We then contacted them to encourage them to apply for the Restaurant Relief Fund grants through the Small Business Administration that Senator Schumer talked about several months ago on Borough Board. Many of them have already been approved for monies ranging from $2,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this will be a real shot in the arm for our struggling small businesses, many of which are owned by socially or economically disadvantaged minorities, women, or veterans who receive priority through May 24th in that funding request. So strongly encourage other community boards to make sure their restaurants know about this and are applying too.
Thank you. Community Board 10.
Good morning again, everyone. A brief report. First of all, I'd like to say I'm not going to hate on you, Stephen and CB7, for stealing one of our board members and hiring Michelle Booker. Instead, I'm going to thank you for noticing and accepting her awesomeness and hiring her. But I'm not going to hate on you. I'm not going to hate. It's going to be hard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. So we did have a public health forum on the relocation of the public health lab to the Harlem Hospital site this past Thursday. I would like to thank Madam Borough President and all our elected officials for joining us on that. We were able to ask really important questions like why now, why Harlem for this center, what are the precautions, what are the safety precautions that they're gonna have in place? Will there be jobs specifically for our community? And also, will it be a pipeline for STEM programs for our young people? So they committed to coming back to us and keeping us informed on that project. But we did have that meeting on Thursday and are looking forward to continuing that conversation. Secondly, I think someone else also talked about sanitation, but with all of the parklets and the open restaurants, open streets, there has been an increased amount of rodents all over some of these areas, especially underneath some of the roadway parklets that are out there. So we have talked to some of our business alliances in the area and some of the businesses just to be cognizant of this. And we are talking to sanitation about different things that can happen to remedy the amount of rodents that are coming out, especially with the summer around the corner. Also, we are having a forum, well, a tenant resource forum from our housing committee in June. We will get that out for everyone so folks can come. It is in partnership with HPD. We are also having a meeting for our land use committee where we will discuss a comprehensive planning process for CB10, and that's coming up at our June meeting. And just for everyone to know, we did look at the MTA proposal at our last general board meeting, and we did pass that in favor. Only the things that we did highlight that DCP and MTA should explore transforming all subway stations in Manhattan Community Board 10 to full ADA accessibility, and that for new residential developments within 500 feet of stations eligible for the FAR bonus, all apartment units within the bonus area should be 100% affordable in addition to the number of apartment units designated under mandatory inclusionary housing prior to receiving the bonus FAR. And then to continue to involve the community board, and we should be consulted on all actions related to ZFA and the subway stations located within the district. So we did pass that at our last June meeting. But the conversation today was very helpful, and I will speak to our land use chair about any additional things. Also, we are also interested in passing a resolution to address the ATVs and dirt bikes. Thank you, Madam Borough President, for that. We are looking into passing our own resolution as that has been an issue in the Harlem area. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Community Board 11, Xavier and Nilsa had to leave. They've put a report in the chat. I'll read it very quickly. Here's a brief summary of the CB11's work. We continue to collaborate with our fellow CBs. Our budget committee is queuing up, or their out budget committee. Maybe it's their out budget committee. No, not funny. Okay, I'm sorry. Their budget committee is queuing up members to present testimony at the hearings on 101st Street. 101st Street is reopened for open streets. There is a meeting dealing with consolidated sanitation garage as an ongoing issue. Executive committee is tonight and will discuss upcoming elections in a virtual environment. COVID information campaign is ongoing. Members who've been vaccinated will be distributing information on the vaccine. We are also hosting a youth symposium this summer, and more information to come. Thank you. CB 12. Eleazar? Okay, CB1, Tammy.
Good morning and thank you very much. Thanks. I'll start off. It's very busy like all other boards, I can imagine. We want to thank the Borough President's Office for helping to negotiate the Laura Dodge work, which will continue with the community regarding the brownfield cleanup site at 250 Water. We're eager to have her back in time for the next phase of review, which is coming up very shortly. Intent. We have many ULURPs. I want to remind everybody that the Governor's Island ULURP, because we believe that that's an asset that affects everyone in the city, as beautiful as it is, goes to the city council vote at the end of this month. Again, one of these kind of conversations are to see how much the input that the community boards have given and the borough president supported get through city council for votes, I think really does have impact and knowledge for taking a look at what role the community board has, and especially on this asset, which is just an incredibly large one. We also have a ULURP that's been filed for 250 Water Street, which has been certified due to the fact that we've had a petition with over 9,000 signatures, as well as hundreds and hundreds of hours thus far of work on this by the public. We will be hosting a public hearing on it on June 3rd. 5 World Trade Center has formed a CAC, or a Community Advisory Committee. Concerns have still been raised about the level of engagement on the project, despite the fact that there is a CAC. And community concerns have come about transparency, representation. We've asked help from our elected officials to encourage the Empire State Development Corporation to be as transparent and inclusive as possible, and responsive to the constituents who are not on the CAC, who have been reaching out with questions about and comments on the project. Beyond some of the large scope things, we had an entire discussion which broached both April and May on Heritage Trail wayfinding markers. This came to us because the DOT is applying to have it renovated, the markers that are there that are under their purview, but have gone through a private partnership to get them done, but the community was not consulted at all on the process until it came to us. And what we're seeing lately is more intersection between DOT decisions that are challenging some of the things that have been promised to the public by either private entities or the city. For example, things such as large city bike racks that were put into a POPs that was promised back to the community, guaranteed to the community through this Water Street text amendment, but now there's no seating, there's no greenery, it is just a full city bike racks. And the POPs that was promised and the bonuses that were given for the initial build, as well as for the Water Street text amendment, are temporarily null and void because there's giant city bike racks in there, which is the same kind of conversation we're going through, where we're having constituent complaints in the business community, because now that they are part of the open restaurant program and they have the sheds in the street bed and are trying to come back, DOT has painted the roads for a bike path that was approved pre-COVID, and the intersection and the conflict between their ability to operate and recoup the potential for their inclusion in the open streets program, however that becomes permanent or not, is conflicting with other decisions that are being made. Hence, I'm going back to the conversation we have about public czar realms. And the business communities did not know anything about the bike racks that were coming up because they said that DOT had not done any kind of outreach specifically to the businesses along the 2 streets, Church and West Broadway, which would have been a role we would have hoped that the DOT would have done. Okay. Speaking of then, continuing on, we did pass a resolution for congestion pricing in CB1 this month, which will go to the full board. It was intense. We've been working on this for 8 months with working groups and notes and virulently different opinions. So good luck for those who are taking it up now. I am happy to share whatever we have. We passed a resolution on planning together the Intro 2186 in relation to the comprehensive long-term planning this month. And we are looking forward to a presentation tonight from MEND NYC with Marissa Sinigo, which is Deputy Commissioner of Public Affairs and Communications from Oath. And let's see, we're also looking at property tax reform for condo owners this month, and expansion of screen DREE eligibility to the residents from former Mitchell Lama buildings. So it is a really, really busy time. We're very, very appreciative. We want to also look ahead and welcome everyone to join us. I heard there's a lot going on June 17th, but we're partnering with BMCC for an event on June 17th, The Untold History of African American and Native Americans in Lower Manhattan. We welcome everyone to come, and I'll be happy to share a flyer when we can. And thank you to Athena Moore from the Borough President's Office for helping us get in contact with some of our potential speakers. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. And I look forward to the conversations about a public space czar.
Thank you. Janine Kiley.
Hi, good morning. Wanted to highlight a number of events. At the beginning of the month, we had a dyslexia forum. We had 104 people participate in it. It was co-hosted by Community Board 2, CEC Districts 1 and District 2, and co-sponsored by CECs 3, 4, and 5, and Community Boards 1, 3, 5, 6, and 8. I'll put in the chat slides from the meeting and access to resources, but there's no universal screening, teacher training, or curriculum for students who are struggling to read and who may or may not be diagnosed with dyslexia. It's very expensive, time consuming, and a huge information curve to even figure out what a child needs. This is our 3rd annual event, and it continues to be popular because every year more and more parents, particularly those who are seeing their children learn at home, see how their children are struggling to read. In terms of process, we've reached out to Andrew, our representative, and others, because we're constantly in need of an extra Zoom account, because with all of the different text amendments, we have a lot of meetings coming up. So I want to thank the Borough President's Office for help with that. I also want to put out a request for clarity as soon as possible on holding hybrid or public meetings, because we are getting lots of requests for those from the public. I want to talk about rezonings and sort of the after effects. There was a rezoning in 2013 in Hudson Square, and part of the mitigation for that was creating an active open space fund that every new or converted or expanded residential unit would pay $5 per square foot. And CB2 did some digging, and we found a 2018 Department of City Planning resolution that said that the local bid would manage that, and the bid is shared information, and that we are due a report annually of how much money is in that fund. And obviously we're going to be pushing to get one, but we haven't gotten any reports yet. But this highlights the point of volunteers are digging and finding out information, and how do we make sure we know about that in the first place. In terms of the text amendments, I'm sure many of you have participated in the open restaurants forums for community boards. There also have been some for stakeholders, who I presume are restaurant owners, laying out the 3-part process. There's a zoning text amendment, legislation, and then the rule promulgation. The public is asking for this information. We invited city planning to our April 27th meeting to give the same 15-minute presentation. They said they were not able to do so. People are still clamoring for that information. I've seen it 3 times. Our committee chairs have seen it more than once. So we'll probably give our own version of it. And our committee will still meet, but the community is being left out of this pre-process. Want to talk about ULURP pre-certification. We have sent a letter to city planning and the Borough President's Office. The 2019 amendments to the city charter provided for 30 days pre-certification notice for community boards, so we would have adequate time to review information. And Chair Gail Benjamin even included in a video describing this process, that basically the community boards would get an early start on reviewing applications. But unfortunately, that is not the case. I'll share a link to that video here. CB to Soho NoHo rezoning was certified on Monday. The final scope of work is 1,600 pages. The DIS is 21 chapters. The table of contents is 15 pages alone. We're still digging through this information because we didn't have 30 days to review it to sort of come up with our plan. It appears that very little has changed from the draft scope of work, other than adding detail. So our main questions to city planning will be to specifically take us through what has changed. And separately, the draft scope of work, there were 634 questions, plus there were 3 sessions this winter. So a total of 968 questions. I'm sure there's some redundancy in there, but none of those have been answered, or if they have been, we don't know, because we were told to submit questions. So we're basically in a situation where we're scrambling to pour through inches thick of information. I've printed out just some of the chapters, and you can see that here. It's about 2 inches on my desk. Our observations broadly are this will be the first upzoning of a historic district anywhere in New York City, which will have significant ramifications throughout the city. Despite requests, there's been no analysis of displacement in the rezoning in adjacent areas, particularly for IMD loft law buildings, renters and joint living working quarters for artists. And there's concern that state law protections may go away if they're converted to residential use. And we've heard from developers as well as advocates that the MIH incentives for building housing versus commercial are just not there. You can get 10 FAR for commercial and 12 FAR with 20 to 30% affordable housing. We see nearby in Hudson Square that Disney and Google or others are opting for office space and not developing housing. And finally, retail, which is already as of right in part of the district, will be fully converted to as of right and for free, and adding use group 10, which is department store uses, even though there's a stated desire to protect small businesses. So this rezoning, as far as we can tell, and we're still digging in, will have significant upzoning for commercial and retail as of right. And meanwhile, residents in joint living working for quarters for artists would be given the option to convert to residential at a cost for $100 per square foot. That would go into an arts fund that would be used anywhere south of 14th Street. I just want to point out that an open space fund is getting $5 per square foot, but arts is valued at 20 times open space at $100 per square foot. And I'm not sure where these numbers are coming from, but I'm just going to throw that out there. Everybody has their own priorities, art, open space, and others. Tammy, you have a question?
Yeah, was the community board, in terms of asking for priority on that, were they consulted at all in terms of valued for open space versus art? And secondly, basically what happens in your district could come all the way down to, for example, my area, because it's anything south of 14th Street, correct?
Absolutely. It could be East Village, it could be Community Board 1, 2, or 3. And if somebody's going to sell an apartment, I give an example of, my mother-in-law, who sold her home before she moved into a nursing home. She did not live in the city. She did not live in Soho. But let's say she had a 1,000 square foot apartment. She would have to pay $100,000 that basically would take away from her ability to pay for her nursing home fees at end of life, which for those of us who've dealt with family members can get really expensive. So just pointing that out. And I think that's it. And I put in the chat the link to the video on the ballot, the amendment 2019 charter amendment, and I put in the chat links to information on slides from the Dyslexia Forum and resources and a video.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eric Diaz, Community Board 3. Okay, so Eleazar Bueno has been having trouble. There, you unmuted. Great. Eleazar.
There you go. Thank you. By popular demand, my report is going to be very, very short. We've had Monday we're fortunate enough to be part of first to advocate and be able to be part of the co-naming of 168th Street and Broadway, between Broadway and Fort Washington, Heroes Way, in commemoration or celebration of all the hard work that Columbia Hospital's New York Presbyterian staff was able to do for our community during the pandemic. So we were very honored to be part of the celebration. The number 2 item is the forum held by BMCC in the in the expansion of their services in the Washington Heights area. We were fortunate enough to be part of that forum, and we were able to ask some distinct needs of our community, such as artificial intelligence and technology and so forth. And my 3rd item is housing. And we are going to hold a series of forums with the Legal Aid Society and MIMIC in reference to all of the evictions that may take place in our community, especially with so many rent-stabilized apartments that we have on our area. So that's going to be what we're going to be working on during the summer. And last but not least is our congratulatory moment to our committees for outreaching to our community a lot more than just our emailing list. I think that community boards, in essence, should be a bit more than just resolutions. I think that we should get our community involved a lot more so that they feel inclusive and that they feel part of what we do. Thank you, Rosie, for the time.
Thank you very much. Madam Borough President.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of things. First of all, thank you for everybody's support on the ATVs and the dirt bikes. I just want to make it clear, I think they are very challenging. I know about the huge concern about crashes, but I hope it works, that there is some support for going after the gas stations and going after the dirt bikes and trying not to arrest. So this is a complicated issue, and any suggestions are welcome. Number 2, I just want to mention that you might remember that the police department has decided to involve the community regarding those new commanding officers. So the first one is the 3-2. And so we'll work with the community board, the precinct council, business people. It's a whole list that has to be accommodated. And so I'll be in touch with you regarding that issue, just so you know that's coming up. I want to mention that in terms of Safe Haven, I just visited in Board 2, and there were some wonderful members from Board 2 who accompanied me. CUCS, which is a nonprofit, an excellent one, is building a safe haven on West 14th Street. And I think if, particularly for Board 8 or anybody else, it would be worth a tour because it is fabulous. The CUCS and I guess DHS and the city, there is a building, it has residents. And what CUCS did was literally build a second home within the building. So the building is split in half just in terms of walls, with very thick walls, I assume, between the residents and the safe haven. The safe haven is going to have, I can't remember, it was 60 beds, but it's not beds, it's individual rooms with accommodations. And on the first, that's on the second floor. On the first floor, or maybe the second and third, I can't remember. But on the first floor is the ability to have people there during the day. It's really nice, and I think people will then see, if you have people who are not understanding what a safe haven is, people stay in their literally apartments until they get permanent supportive or other kinds of housing. And it's usually could be up to 10 months, something like that. So I just thought you should see that if you have challenges within the community, because it's excellent. I do want to thank some of these amazing, you should listen to yourself. I know you have, but you're a phenomenal group of leaders in all different directions. But some of the things that we're pushing on is what Board 9 mentioned in terms of 1753 Amsterdam. We have to convince not only the owner, the church, but also Department of Homeless Services to say, we don't want transitional, we want permanent housing. And it's really frustrating to have to do that. You would think that that's what our goal is. There's an owner who will do it. Here is a community who will do it. and goodness knows there's a need. So that kind of frustration is really frustrating. So just so you know, we're on that. And I'm also frustrated. I want to thank Community Board 12 for all your support on 857 Riverside Drive. This house should be landmarked. This community should be a historic district. So we'll continue to work with you. I also want to say this public realm czar idea, every single situation is, whether it is city bike, restaurants, bike lanes, bus lanes, even scaffolding, I would throw into the mix in terms of challenging. What is our street? What is the sidewalk? And how in the world can these agencies work together? Very, very frustrating. The other issue is just in Albany, I believe, somebody know more than I, 421A is coming up. Board 8 knows better than anybody. We're dealing with the Normandy, but I've been dealing with this for a while. When 421A, even with its quote unquote improvements, meaning you can stay rent stabilized when the abatement ends, forget even the fact that the city loses money, you get kicked out. I mean, in the sense of, it looks like affordable housing, but it's not, because at the end of 421A, one way or another, whether it's the end of the abatement or the person moves or God forbid passes, that is no longer affordable. So I just want to say, you know, anything you can do to weigh in like that. The issue of vaccination, I want to say thank all the community boards. Just I think these incentives are working, and I believe in them now. But I visited Grand Central and I visited Penn Station, and obviously those are not neighborhood based, but I'm sure there were members from our communities in both, because there were so many people. They're doing 350 a day. It's convenient. It's J&J. Somos is the provider. The governor's doing it, and I have to say it was excellent, because people are really, I think 7-day Metro card helps, but people are really showing up, and it's an example of how to get people to get vaccinated. I want to, just a couple other things. Senior centers, thank you, Board 8, for your resolution. I will say they're not open yet. So everything that you're doing is helpful, because the seniors continue everywhere I go to ask for that. So far, I have not heard anything different, unless anybody else has it. You know, the gyms, the museums, the restaurants, the coffee shops, they're all open. But for some reason, people think that the senior centers should not be open. Very frustrating. In terms of storefronts, I know this has always been an issue. It's not a new one. And I know that at this point we have more vacancies. And I know at this point we're also concerned that we have, we don't want to hurt any businesses, and I certainly don't. And hopefully in October is a new date, which is frustrating also, on the Department of Finance to be able to give us a data on every single vacancy. I've been waiting since February. But Councilmember Rosenthal and I did introduce 2299. It's not necessarily a perfect bill, but it certainly has a beginning and what it says, and you can put the information in the chat so you can read it for yourself, you can decide. But if in fact, let's hope, entrepreneurs, owner-operated, mom and pops fill up some of these vacancies and not the national chains, which is what we want, and hopefully we're working on that, then it would say, give us at least, it's more boilerplate that people can understand, it's in different languages, that has the understanding of transparency, for lack of a better word, so that people know what they're signing. That's also a huge issue. And then when you have something like that, there's a whole bunch of ways that lease has to be transparent. And if the owner won't talk to you, he has to talk to you, she has to talk to you as a commercial tenant. And if you really have another person who's moving into that space after you have a discussion and you can't come to an agreement on the rent, there's a certain time period before you have to move. But if there's no other owner really moving in, and let me tell you, I can't tell you how many times they say there's a new commercial and there's nobody, because I can see it with my own eyes. Then you have another year to be able to move. So it's all those kinds of discussions and provisions, and you can look at it for yourself, but I'd love to get your feedback. We meet, as you know, every Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and sometimes talks about vaccine, and sometimes it talks about Manhattan or the city recovery. Obviously, they work together. It's not like they're separate issues. The most recent was fantastic. You should go, if I suggest, to the archive on our site, because 3 people were phenomenal. Fred Dixon is head of NYC and Company, and what it said to me in addition to him having great slides, was we need as a borough, because we are a Manhattanite, to make sure that as the day trippers, because that's who's coming to New York now, we hope to have the international and the overnight soon, but it's a lot of day trippers. So I know in the past, the Biz have done sort of tours with some of the concierges at the hotels. We need to think of, because we have the best neighborhood, we have to help our small business. And one way to do that, there are tourists coming. So what can we do together? And we'd be glad to work with you on this to get them to our neighborhoods. And there's money, some of the federal money is going to NYC and Company, and they would be glad to work with us on this. And then Nicole Evans, whom all of us know from Harlem, talked about the work that they're doing to try to get more tourists to Harlem. And then Independent Budget Office, Jonathan Rosenberg, gave some phenomenal numbers, because I am really nervous, particularly on education, because that's where a lot of this federal money is going. Where is it going? And there's a great breakdown. He had 3 specific spreadsheets just for this meeting and just for the topics that we're interested in. So you might want to look at them and see if it's relevant to your board. But we will have every 3 o'clock every Tuesday, and I think those who join us find it very, very helpful. And even things like broadband, the money is going through the state. Is it actually coming to our communities? I know Board 12 and I have talked a lot about the lack of broadband and connectivity and internet access for the businesses in Upper Manhattan. I also want to mention that REDC, which is the governor's regional economic development, and that is the money that is coming now to the 5 boroughs and to the state. REDC, you should look at it, make sure that your businesses are applying. I want to make sure that every borough, but particularly Manhattan, gets monies. 10 regions is what the city's divided into. The other issue is, I want to be honest, is that there is one $10 million allocation for each region. And in the past, it's gone to the other boroughs. So we hope it's Manhattan's time. We are working with Chinatown because I think they've been hurt the most in terms of the economy. And so we're working with them to try to get the $10 million to go to them. But I'm sure the other boroughs are going to be applying also, as they have in the past. So we're working hard on that application. Just like everybody else, thanks to our land use staff, we have 19 projects in ULIP right now. I think you've talked about most of them. We've done almost, I think, 175 or more since I've become borough president. And I think it is more than any other borough and more than most boroughs combined. I think you know most of them because you certainly listed some of them and you have the list. We also have the citywide text amendments, which you know about, the hotels. We've talked a lot about zoning for accessibility, health and fitness, which is the gyms, and all the issues around the open streets, which you know only too well. We're working hard on community board appointments. I know they're a month late, but we had tons and tons and tons of requests. So we're trying to make sure it's fair and done. You have them all done by your June meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Borough President. Not seeing anyone else has joined this call. I'm just going to check with Eric Diaz. Are you able to unmute and give a report for CB3? Eric, if you could put something in the chat.
Hi, Rosie. Sorry
Hey,
about that. Can you guys see me? Sorry. Oops.
Yes, we can see you.
Lighting here. All right. So just wanted to give a brief report on CB3. I was asked by our chairperson, Alicia Coleman, to give a brief report on our joint committee with Transportation and Human Services Committee, which I sit on. And that is a presentation that was done by a Chinatown Block Association and another organization providing surveys directly from businesses and seniors from CB3 area regarding outdoor dining. And so the survey was a mixed bag of mostly negative reviews and some impact to quality of life there for our seniors in the community. And so that was our presentation this month so far. The next thing to just present to the Borough President and to this board is that we.
Eric, you're muted now.
You guys hear me?
Now we hear you.
Sorry about that. I got somebody
Turn it up,
And
Eric.
so we do, and so yes, so we're starting to do assessments for every committee, some goals on what we want to accomplish this year. And so that's been what's keeping the board active here at CB3 amidst all the fun issues that are here in this community board that your office knows very well and that this board knows. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone against? The ayes have it. Okay, just a reminder, we'll send you something with the slide deck from today so we can get your questions. Please get your questions to Lisette Shapiro. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you, Rosie.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, BP.